I have been to a couple sites, and yeah, it's very sobering. You see it, and you smell it, and you feel it, and you see the mistakes that were made.
Ward Larsen flew fighters in Desert Storm, investigated crashes when the wreckage still smoked, and then turned those experiences into stories that move at combat speed but linger with conscience.
The more difficult part is staying true to the humanity of it all, because there's no manual for that. And we're not wired as humans to deal with that. If I'm shooting someone and his child is in the background, and I'm not going to hurt the child, but I'm going to do this in front of the child, is that the right thing to do, or do I just stand down and do it another day, or take a pass?
I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Ward Larsen flew fighters in Desert Storm, investigated crashes when the wreckage still smoked, and then turned those experiences into stories that move at combat speed but linger with conscience. His novels wrestle with duty and consequences, precision and mercy. Ward, thank you for your service and for the story shaped by it. We're honored to talk to you today.
I'm glad to be able to share them.
You've operated in environments where mistakes are fatal. What has responsibility been like throughout your life, both in the air and on the page?
Yeah, of course, being a pilot, it's pretty obvious that you have those responsibilities. And of course, I started flying in the military when I was right out of college. And it's a much more challenging environment than what I ended up doing, which was flying for the airlines. It actually worked out well. I was in the service for 7.5 years, and basically I trained, and then right at the very end, before I got out and separated, I went to Desert Storm and flew in combat. So I really got that progression of seeing the training come to life in a real serious situation. And in Desert Storm, I was a flight leader and an instructor pilot, so definitely some responsibility there. And even and then after that, I went to the airlines and spent over 30 years now as a captain for one of the major airlines. And there's some responsibility there too, but you learn how to delegate, you learn how to rely on others. And I think you can't do everything yourself. I flew a single seat airplane. But even then, you have wingmen, and you can't do it all yourself. So you learn how to manage the risk with others.
Ward, this is like the worst question you're going to ever get asked. But I've always wondered, when you're like a military trained pilot, how boring is it just flying a commercial airline?
There are moments when it's boring. Yes, you take off. The takeoff and landing is when you do most of your real work. And then in between, or in that hour or 2 or 3 of cruise, it can be boring. But, it's like any kind of flying where it's interspersed with moments of sheer terror, as they say. It's different. And it's an adjustment. The airplanes, actually, I flew the A-10 in the Airforce and the 737 when I first went to the airlines. And they actually flew remarkably similar, just in terms of handling and takeoff and landing. There were a lot of similarities, but yeah, the background of what you're doing is definitely different, and you adjust.
I've always felt better when you get on a plane and the pilot served in the military. Anyways, do you feel like writing thrillers isn't just entertainment, but a form of stewardship over truth and experience?
Yeah, I try to convey those experiences I've had in flying in my books. I do that in every book. They're not exclusively flying related. I've had the honor just recently of writing the next Tom Clancy book. Rules of Engagement comes out in May. And that was kind of interesting for me because, I read The Hunt for Red October 40 years ago. And I never imagining at the time that here I would be, writing book number 27 in the series. So to be able to translate some of my experiences into such an iconic series is really, really an honor for me. It really is.
Many pilots talk about the silence after the engine shut down. Did you experience that, and did writing ever give it meaning?
Yeah, it was different because in the Air Force, when you finish a flight, it's not all over. You have to go in and, in combat, you have to go debrief intelligence and, tell them what you did and didn't do. In training, you do a lot of debriefing with the other pilots and talk about what happened. So much of the time you spend as a pilot in the Air Force, you're not actually in the cockpit. You're before and after preparing and debriefing for flights. Whereas the airlines, once you shut down those engines and set the parking brake, you really don't think about it again until the next week. There's just that's not that kind of environment. So it was very different. And in terms of in flight, I actually have shut down engines in flight too. And that's a little hairy. Only once, and it was in the Air Force, not with the
I was going to
airlines.
ask if it was military or
Yeah, that was
commercial.
military. Yeah.
Is there any part of your military discipline that still governs your daily life, not as a pilot, but as a husband, father, and storyteller?
I think there's a sense of honor. It's interesting because I write military thrillers. That's a large part of my audience, my readership. So keeping true to those kind of precepts, those military precepts, and the code of honor, I think really resonates with my readers for that reason because that's who they are. And the in my marriage, same thing. I've been married for 40 years now, and I think my wife was with me when I was in the Air Force, so she was in that environment, and I think that both of our experiences there in that kind of conservative military environment was very formative to the rest of our lives. We have three children, very blessed with, and five grandchildren now. And I think I think the military was a very positive influence on me.
How about on more of the discipline side?
In terms of discipline, I think it's sort of under the radar, but it just sort of forms the way you go about your day. I try not to waste time. My wife and I have a thing where we make the bed together every morning when I'm home, and it's a small thing, but that's a military inspired tradition. And I've heard, very high-ranking officers. Somebody has a famous speech about that, where the first thing you do is make your bed in the morning, and just to keep perspective. And so, it's a small thing, but and I think it flows over into my writing too. I try not to waste time. If I have an hour spare, I get behind the computer and I'll rewrite something I've written. So just that discipline of staying busy, staying on task, I think it feeds into the success I've had.
Do you feel like writing thrillers isn't just entertainment, but a form of stewardship over truth and experience?
Absolutely. I feel that you have to attain a level of readership to where you're sustaining yourself and getting books published. Once you've done that, I feel there is an obligation to use it as a positive, to kind of send a message. And you can do it in so many ways in a book. You can do it in very small ways, just by things that your characters do, or you can, come up with phrases that just you think will resonate with people. And yes, you can very much send a positive message, and that's what people want to read about. They want protagonists who are making the right choices and doing things that feel right to readers. And I think that it could be a challenge sometimes because you're putting them in difficult situations, but though that sense of honor, that sense of duty to do the right thing within the letter of the law, it's not easy, and that's why you want to put your characters in those difficult decision-making points in the book. So definitely that is part of why I write. I try to get messages across the board.
Ward, my dad talks about, as a fellow author, my dad talks about how he, in his books, there's kind of always a little bit of the author in the characters. Do you have characters in your stories that you think, is there one character in particular that maybe it's got a little more of you in it than anyone else?
I never thought about it specifically. I would lean to say no. I think there's a little bit of me in all the characters, at least the good guys. I don't think that's, I don't think you can avoid that. But, and the same goes for other people. You meet people that you both like and don't like, and they kind of find their way into your books and find your way into your characters, their traits. So I don't think there's a specific character in my books, and then I've even used some names. There was one name in an early series I did, the name of Jammer Davis. There is a real Jammer Davis. He was an Air Force pilot, just a larger than life individual. One of the pilots I used to fly with at the airline, and I just liked that name. I thought that was a perfect name. It was actually his call sign. His real name wasn't Jammer, but I just liked that name so much. It just fit the character, so I used it. But other than that, it had nothing to do with the person. It wasn't like I was trying to draw that person. So
You've seen catastrophe up close as an investigator. How did standing in Wreckage change the way you write about risk, blame, and mercy?
definitely does. I was never on a formal accident board. I attended the Air Force's accident investigation course, and basically that certifies you to sit on boards because the military does their own accident investigations. When a civilian airliner goes down, the NTSB does it. But in the military, they do their own for a lot of good reasons. And so you learn, it's about a 2 month course, and you learn how to go through those investigations. I never sat on an actual board because the only airplane that went down, thankfully it's an uncommon event, was in my squadron, and you're not allowed to investigate crashes in your own squadron. But I have been to a couple sites, and yeah, it's very sobering. It's you see it and you smell it and you feel it, and it kind of gives you a reality check, as it were, and reading the reports. When you finally figure out what went wrong, which you pretty much always do, and you see the mistakes that were made, and maybe there are mistakes that you've made in the past, and fortunately your circumstances were different and it didn't turn critical. So it's very enlightening, and I think it's something that it's hard to explain until you've been there. I've described in a couple of books, standing at an air crash, and I try to convey that to my readers, that sense, all the different senses right there. You go there the next day and there's still smoke coming up, wisping up from the wreckage, and just the chaos and the randomness of, how things break and explode and just everything that happens. It's sobering, but it's reality, and I think it definitely is something I have used and will continue to use in my books.
What do you think drew you to that? Because that's like everybody else's reoccurring nightmares, like the plane crash, right? What do you think?
You
And
know,
I, like, what brought you? Yeah, what brought you down that path?
Well, as a pilot in the Air Force, you're always going to have additional duties, and that's one of them you can have. You can go to weapons school like Top Gun and become a weapons instructor. You can be a safety officer, where you're certified to look at crashes, and there are some other qualifications you can do too. I just thought it'd be interesting. It just struck me as kind of fascinating, because as all pilots get, safety bulletins and magazines and things where you read the results of these investigations and how they but and what the causes were, but the question of how they came about, how they reached those determinations, I thought was kind of fascinating. It's basically detective work. I mean, as I said, I wrote a couple books from that perspective, that of an aircraft accident investigator, and it's sort of a police procedural where you're just trying to, here's the scene of the crime, and you've got to uncover all the evidence and figure out, what the source was. And it's really interesting. And you get all kinds of people involved. You get metallurgists, you get engine manufacturers, all kinds of people come in to get to the bottom of it. And it's just an interesting process.
Did you ever go to one that made you not second guess it, but made you want to stop? Like made you say that you saw a wreckage or a crash and you just said like, ah, this is too much for me?
No, because it's necessary. It's, you basically, if you do it and get it right, you're going to be doing good. You're going to be saving people in the end. That's really an important thing to get to the bottom of what went wrong. There's a kind of a parable in pilot lore that we all have these great big manuals that we have to sort through and procedures that we have to memorize. And it's often said that all those procedures were written in blood because basically they were all a determination that this had caused an accident. So now there's a procedure to keep you from doing that again. So yeah, so definitely I don't think, I wanted to stop doing it just because of the environment of the situation. You knew you were doing good with it.
Is there a mission or investigation you never wrote about, but still quietly influences decisions that you or your characters make today?
I can't think of a single mission that jumps to mind. Just little snippets of various missions. I remember in Desert Storm, I was flying with a different squadron, so it was a lot of pilots I wasn't really that familiar with. And I remember flying with one guy who got put on my wing, who kind of had gotten a reputation for not wanting to fly. He was really kind of frightened to be out there, and so you kind of you have to know the people you're flying with, and to know what to expect, what they may and may not do. And it all went fine. That there was no issues on that mission, but it kind of gives you a perspective that you have to know who you're working with, and it's when you're working with people you aren't as familiar with as you would be in your own squadron, you have to take an extra level of care. So just little things like that I do recall. But as far as one particular mission that shaped things, I don't say that. I think it was more of a cumulative effect of all various things that happened both before and after the conflict and even beyond. When I fly for the airline, I still fly with some guys who do some pretty incredible things, and it still informs me to this day.
Your books are technically precise, but they also carry emotional weight. How do you ensure accuracy never smothers humanity?
Yeah, the technical accuracy, I guess, is the easy part. On the flying scenes that I write, I have a good background in that, so I don't have to do a lot of research. I also write a lot of military stuff where I do have to do some research about guns and things like that and spy weapons. Um, but yeah, the more difficult part is staying true to the humanity of it all because there's no manual for that. And yeah, in spite of AI these days, AI doesn't have that soul, and that's where you have to, as a writer, draw that out of yourself and see it in others and translate it into the written form.
I want to take a quick detour to ask about one of your more popular protagonists. Your character, David Slayton, lives between justice and necessity. Where do you draw that line, and how has it shifted over time?
Good question. Like any special operator, he does live in that place, that murky gray area of doing the right thing versus doing some very terrible things. And so, as a writer, you try to make the antagonist deserving of that, but you also, make the antagonist human so that, he has to wrestle with that fact that, that this person he's killing may have a family, may have a wife or a child, and that's a very difficult thing. I think part of the reason I built that conflict with David Slayton is because he himself lost a wife and child very early on, and that was part of his original recruitment into, at the time, Mossad. And I think that gave him a perspective going forward where he has to deal with that when he's going about his own business of killing people, which is essentially becomes his job. So, yeah, I think grounding your protagonist with that kind of baggage gives him a perspective that's very relevant to what the challenges he faces.
You've written about technology accelerating faster than wisdom. What worries you most about where power is headed, and what still gives you hope?
That is one of my biggest concerns right now, and I've said this before in many forums. I really think that technology is advancing at a pace that's beyond our ability to adapt to it. You see it in social media. You see it in a lot of places. AI now is going to become a challenge. But humans are kind of wired to, for example, believe what they see and hear. Right now, you can go on AI and you can pretty much make anybody whose face is available online do anything and say anything. And we're not wired as humans to deal with that. That's just not what our brains have evolved to do. So and I think that's the source of a lot of our discord these days, both domestically and overseas, is that people are just going down rabbit holes. We have these algorithms with social media sites that once you start going in a direction, it'll just throw gasoline on it and launch you in that direction as fast as it can. And that's kind of a dangerous thing. And I don't know where it's all headed. I don't write science fiction, but I'll leave that to the science fiction writers. But it's kind of a frightening place, the things that are happening right now, and the fact that we're not dealing with it well. It's a very good question.
Do you think that technology, obviously social media, AI, and just like ruining society in real time, but do you think that technology kind of acceleration is also something you're seeing in the military?
Yeah, the military is definitely leveraging AI. I mean, there are drones now in this Tom Clancy book I just wrote, and I kind of made it up, but I bet you it exists. I had drones small drones that are basically hunter killers, and they go out and they use a camera for facial recognition, and they will look at a face and decide if that's somebody on the battlefield as it is that deserves to be killed. And there's a lot of different protocols you can do to decide who goes and who doesn't. But that's the point we're at. You look at what's happening in Ukraine; it's just changing at light speed the way they're using drones. About 10 months ago, Ukraine launched an attack on Russia, and it was, yeah, you imagine you heard about it. It was the drones that they put in the backs of some containers, and they basically drove them around Russia, parked them outside or near strategic bomber bases, and then doors opened in the top of the truck, and these drones came out and they destroyed about a quarter of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, and within an hour. The Ukrainians, I mean, it was a great victory for them, and they said that they had been working on that for 18 months. Well, 20 months before that attack, I had a book come out called Assassin's Mark. And the beginning of that book, there was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States. And the way it went about is there was a container truck parked in the path of Marine One as it went from Andrews to the White House. And the top of that truck opened up, and a swarm of drones came out the top, and they took out Marine One. And so it was exactly what I came up with. Now, did they get that from my book? I suspect not. I mean, it's conceivable, but I think more likely the point is that if I can think of it as a writer, anybody can think of it. And I think it's part of my duty as a writer to come up with these scenarios just so we can think about them and maybe defend against them. And I think that's kind of part of the service that we as thriller writers, that's part of our duty.
It's so hard now to tell, like we were just saying with AI and social media, what's real and what's not. I've seen though, like multiple places where it's been reported that the United States with the whole thing with Maduro, that like when they went in there, there was like, I don't even know what to call it. People saying like a sonic weapon, and people were like bleeding out their nose and mouth, and they like their head was killing them and they dropped to the floor.
Yeah.
Like that's another, and there people are saying like no one knows what that could be. And that's a scary thought too, that I'm glad they're on our side. It's not scary for me, it's scary for other people, I guess. But that countries have like military technology that's advanced. It's advanced so far since the last time we've seen, like the main, I guess, world superpowers fight, that there's all kinds of new things that no one wants to show their hand that exist.
True. Yeah. Yeah, it's big in cyber where, people have capabilities, but they don't want to use them unless it's absolutely necessary because they don't want to, as you say, show their hand. The specific weapon you mentioned is some kind of directed energy weapon, it's assumed, where it happened first in Cuba and affected some, I think, State Department or CIA people in Cuba. But, it really seems to be a real deal. And just recently, I think, in the last couple of days, I heard that one of our intelligence agencies had paid a lot of money to buy a prototype of this weapon, like secretly on a sting operation. So apparently we have that weapon now, unless we got scammed and somebody just made us. Apparently they paid a lot of money for it, but it was because the theory all along was that if it was a directed energy weapon, some kind of directed acoustic weapon that did this, which is conceivable, that it couldn't be made, it couldn't be miniaturized. It would have to be something big, like maybe in a large truck. And what they bought was apparently a backpack-sized device. So I don't know. I don't. It came out just in the last couple of days. I read an article about it, and there weren't a lot of details. But yeah, there's a lot going on. China is investing a lot of money, and they're catching up with us in terms of technology. We have kind of, I think, for a long time, kind of bogged down in this big industrial with very large companies that make all our military hardware, and it's always very expensive, gold-plated stuff. Whereas if you look at Ukraine, what's working right now, it's really just the stuff people are making in their oversized garages. It's just a bunch of guys in a hangar given plenty of resources, and they just kind of make stuff up as they go. And it changes constantly with the electronic environment, the jamming and whatnot. So it's changing at lightning speed right now. And again, that's something I'm not sure how well we're gonna adapt to that.
I know faith plays a big role in your life. Where has your faith been most tested? And did that testing change how you live and write?
I think my faith was tested, of course, when I went into combat. That was a trying experience. It didn't happen overnight. There was a buildup to that, about a 5 month buildup to the actual war that came about. But that would probably be my answer. And again, that's something I try to translate into my stories as best I can.
Did faith come to you as certainty or something quieter, more like endurance than answers? I ask because I personally struggled with religion until Jesus gave me another chance through my ALS diagnosis. It took a lot for me to finally see it.
I think faith, is a more of a gradual thing for me. I think, seeing, I have not gone through the travails that you have certainly gone through, but we all have our moments in life, and I feel really that in many ways I've been very blessed, and I am having a growing appreciation of that I haven't had those kinds of tragedies right now, and I almost feel like I'm due one, like something is pending, because I have not had that. But my faith is definitely something that has grown over time. I think that's an age thing too. I think, you get older and you see your friends start to have, issues, health issues. Some of them pass away, and it's a very gradual growing thing.
What lessons about leadership actually survive outside uniform, especially around a kitchen table with friends and family?
Yeah, leadership. I mean, having been in the military, you get professional, military education, leadership education. But I think really it's something you learn from leading men and women, both in training and battle. And as you say, you learn it just at home around the kitchen table. I have five grandkids, all of whom I've seen recently in the last few weeks. And it brings back a lot of memories to my own children when they were that age. They're all toddlers, the grandkids are. So you really kind of see that progression, and that you remember things that you just mentioned, changing diapers. I had to figure out how to do that again. Um, but leadership is something, as an airline captain, that you have to have a grip on, because you are technically the in command of that airplane. And so I do it in my daily life, but the more I do it, the more I find out it's not something to be wielded, but something to be managed. You're trying to delegate and use others, and again, it works at home too, as you say, around the kitchen table, where you're trying to just get along with others, and for a productive outcome. And that's, I think, the basic essence of leadership.
When trust was broken by systems, people, or outcomes, how did you rebuild it without hardening your heart?
I think we all have our failures and challenges, and I, you learn how to face them again. The older you get, I think the more patient you are in facing those challenges, the more experienced you are, and you learn that certain people tend to break trust, and you have to learn how to deal with them. My middle son is a doctor. He's an addiction medicine doctor, so he deals with a lot of patients who are going through some very trying times and are living beneath roadbeds and things like that. And he really sees a wide spectrum of people who are facing severe challenges in life, even if some of them are self-inflicted. So it's just that kind of experience that I think, he tells me his experiences, and it really further informs me. Gives me lessons of things I can do better, and ways I can get along better than I maybe have.
Do you have any questions that your characters keep asking that you're still working through yourself?
I think it goes back to the issue of making difficult decisions in virtually impossible situations. That's where you put your characters, and that's you ask yourself those questions. If I'm shooting someone and his child is in the background, and I'm not going to hurt the child, but I'm going to do this in front of the child, is that the right thing to do, or do I just stand down and do it another day, or take a pass? You put your characters in situations like that, and repeatedly, and it's hard as an author to come up with these new situations, new ideas that haven't been done before. But again, you're trying to make your characters hold true to the honor, the values that I think we all aspire to.
I like that. You've been trusted to carry forward iconic universes like Tom Clancy's. How do you honor legacy without becoming trapped by it?
That's a good question. I never met Tom Clancy. I wish I had, but he passed away, I think, about 13 years ago now. As I mentioned earlier, I read that first book, The Hunt for Red October, 40 years ago, and never thinking that I would be writing the series. It's a little difficult because there's so much, I hate to use the word baggage, but there's a lot of Clancy books, and writing the new one, you have to reference all those old, not all the old ones, but you have to get the references you use correct, and that's a lot to dig through. The first thing I did when I took on this project was I went on Amazon and I bought the entire Tom Clancy Jack Ryan series in one fell swoop, which you can do actually. It's like $200. You can buy all the Jack Ryan books, and I had to, because I had to get them on my Kindle to search them, make them, have a nice searchable database where I could go back and see what John Clark had done, 3 books ago, and what color his eyes were and things like that. And it takes some research. So, I definitely wanted to honor that series. I wanted to do it right because it was so iconic. It was so important to me, as a young reader. I wanted to get it as right as I could, but it was a lot of work. That's the bottom line answer. Is it takes a lot of work to do justice to a series like that.
Does it feel different when you're writing that, knowing the weight behind it, and like, do you, as an author, does it feel different than when you're writing your own series versus writing that?
Yeah, I mean, the ideas for the story were really no different, but yeah, just having those characters with so much background. And it just so happens, I even before I got that gig, I was in the Tom Clancy fan group on Facebook, just because I always I've been a fan of Tom Clancy, and I didn't really engage a whole lot, but I kind of lurked and listened to the posts. So now I'm still on there, and I see all these posts, and
Awesome.
it's a universe to itself. It's the most iconic military thriller series of all time. So to have a hand in that is really a terrific honor. And I'm glad I got the chance to do that. I think that's just going to do one book for the moment. And I think Mike Woodward, MP Woodward, is going to do the next two books. And it was a scheduling thing that kind of got in the way because I'm working with Brad Thor now. Our book, Cold Zero, is coming out in a couple of weeks here. But yeah, I tried very hard to do that book justice.
Being in the Facebook fan club group is that's such a good part of the story. Was there, when you got asked, like, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I had known the editor who was in charge of that for a while, and I know Jeff Williams and Brian Andrews, and know them very well. I've known them for a while, and that's who was writing it before me. So, it wasn't completely foreign, and I wasn't a complete surprise that I got the offer. But I was definitely thrilled to have that chance. And yeah, and again, on the Facebook group, you can kind of see the reactions when it became public knowledge that I was going to write one. And I engaged this briefly, but I don't get out there much because I don't want to really get in the way of what's being said, and I don't want to make them feel like I'm lurking around listening to everything that's being said. But and again, that's part of our world today. That it's just, gosh, it's something new. You can get in the middle of a fan group and they won't even know it, kind of thing. Um, it's uh, it's a different world, and I'm trying to adapt like everyone.
What responsibility does a writer with of real world experience have to the reader who has never lived it?
I think you have a responsibility to get the details right and the emotions right. Having flown in combat, I know what it feels like to have been there, and I think you can sense that. We talked earlier briefly about Jack Carr and how did an interview with him. Same thing. He's been there, done that, and you can really sense that in his book. So I really try for that to put the reader in both the technical frame of mind and also the real emotional frame of mind of your protagonist, because both are very important. And that's what I think readers want from this kind of book. They want to know what it's like to have been there and done that. So there's definitely a strong responsibility. Sometimes it involves research. Sometimes it you have to do some digging. I was very lucky. I'm doing this book with Brad Thor. It's coming out soon, Cold Zero, and it takes place in the Arctic. And it just so happened, as we started to write, I was at my airline and I flew with a guy, a first officer, who flies in the New York Air National Guard still, and he flies in the only unit in the world that flies C-130s on snow skis onto the ice, and they go up to Greenland and down to Antarctica. So I kind of pumped in for information and ended up using that in the book. Because I said, can you actually land, a C-130 at an ice sheet in the Arctic? And he was like, well, yes, you can if the ice is thick enough. So it was really just, serendipitous that I actually flew with this person at that time, and it really helped. So got to do the
What are the
research and
odds?
again put the reader into that frame of mind where you really they can learn
What
something and they can feel what the protagonists are feeling.
what the heck are the odds of flying with the one guy who does
Yeah,
that?
he was the guy, and it was perfect.
As your body of work grows, how do you protect the still place of inspiration the stories come from?
It's interesting. You want to advance your characters, and especially in the series that I've done for a long time. And your character, has a background. He has, maybe a family, which my main character does. He's acquired a family. So you advance the story, and that kind of freshens it up, I think, and it changes priorities, perhaps. My main character, David Slayton, he is no longer in the field in the most recent book. He's kind of gone into management very reluctantly, and I've got a new guy who's in the field. Conversely, when I wrote this book with Brad, Cold Zero, it was a fresh sheet of paper. There was no backstory, so it's very different. And we actually had a good time with it because we had that clean sheet of paper where we could just make the characters do whatever they want, and we didn't have to worry about it. Was a standalone book, so we didn't have to worry about the next book. We just made one story. So as a writer, I think that's kind of nice to do that, to do a standalone book where you're just kind of getting out of your normal routine, your normal characters, and doing something different once in a while. So it was very good, a good experience.
Do you ever come up with ideas for things, but they maybe don't fit the series? So you like, I don't know, stockpile it away or kind of write it
Yeah,
down and come back to it?
yeah. The most common question is, where do you get your ideas? And all you have to do is read a newspaper every day, and there's just no shortage of ideas out there. So I kind of keep them in the back of my mind. Occasionally, I'll write down a few snippets of the basics of the story, and most of them get discarded, but some I kind of keep coming back to, and those end up often becoming storyline for the next book. So it's current events. There's so much going on in the world today. There's no shortage of stories.
The problem with the news today is people are going to say there's no way, even if in a fiction book, they won't believe it.
Yeah, and that's some of the things that have happened in the last few years. You look at it and go, "No, I could have written that up and sent it to my editor as a proposal," and he would go, "Nah, nobody's going to believe that."
Looking back at the young man who first climbed into a cockpit and the writer that you are now, has there been a thread that stayed unbroken through both lives?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was not one of those little kids that said I always wanted to be a writer. The flying thing struck me in college because I had taken just sort of a joyride with the father of a friend of mine in an airplane. I thought that was cool, so I started getting into flying and looking into it. But I was always a reader, but I never really thought about writing until I was in my early 30s when I started working for the airline and had some time on my hands. I think that the two go together very well because I can, as you say, thread the flying into my writing. So it was a very sort of a seamless method because it was so applicable what I did in my day job to the writing. So, and the things like the leadership and the family, all that, none of that changes. So those um, parallels remain the same. Those don't go away, and those carry through whatever you do in life.
For making the transition from a avid reader and pilot and military and all that to a writer, do you have any suggestions for somebody if there's someone listening now who has lived an interesting life or maybe a fellow person who's served the country? Do you have advice for? Do you get? You probably get this question a lot, but do you have like a? If you had to give a short kind of piece of advice, what would you give them?
To get going in the writing business with somebody with an interesting background,
Yeah, yeah.
the people I've seen do that and have success, it's changed over the years. It used to be you'd write your chapters or whatever and send them to an agent, so on and so forth. But the people that I've seen succeed at that in recent years have been good networking people. They'll go to the writing conferences and meet just other writers and editors and agents. I go to a lot of conferences, and it's just amazing the number of people you see. And if you go year after year, you start to make friends and go to lunch with people, and you can really get your story out that way or get it looked at least. I mean, in the end, you got to be a decent writer, and you have to have good stories to tell, and that's the bottom line. But to get those seen, there's some good stories out there that just aren't seeing the light of day because people are not, as you say, they don't know how to go about it, how to get it into print.
I wondered if Now, like kind of what's happening in the media space with things like on a podcasts, or like if people just turning on their iPhone, recording themselves, putting it out there, comedians and stuff like that, that are getting traction now, kind of going all the way like around the industry, right? Like kind of skipping the line and not where back in the day it was you kind of paid your dues and had to be in the industry and live in the area and all that stuff. I wonder if someone could achieve that as an author. Like if somebody went on social media and released like a chapter of a book and then like every week or something like that. I don't know. I don't know if it's the same though, because it's a different attention span.
Some of it's just that strike of lightning luck. I mean, there are some self-published authors who have done astoundingly well and then been picked up by major publishers. And if you just look at the bestseller list today, New York Times, there's probably two or three writers on there who just started as self-published writers, and by whatever hook or crook or a strike of lightning, their books just took off. And once the book takes off, then you're going to get interest. But how do you do that? I don't know. Sometimes it's just some current event that just strikes at the right time. Sometimes it's a genre that just all of a sudden takes off, and you have a bunch of books in that genre. It's hard to say. There's no guaranteed way of doing it. You just have to get your work out there and get it seen.
Before we close, brag about your family for a moment and tell us what you hope they understand about you when they read these books years from now.
One of the kind of self constraints I put on myself at the outset was that, I'm writing spy thrillers, military thrillers. Some of those have some pretty disturbing things in them. I set out to write a book that my kids, who at the time were probably 8 and 10, could read, and I wouldn't feel bad about letting them read it. And I've kind of stuck to that, in terms of the language and the situations I put my characters in. And I don't think that's really harmed me during my career. In fact, in a certain way, I think it's probably helped me, because I think we've all read those books where you just kind of go, oh, it gets over the top, and you want to go take a shower or something. But that was one of my rules, and I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad I held to it. There are people die in my books. There are people that have affairs and things like that, but I think it's dealt with in a way that's palatable to almost all readers.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
When I got married, that's what comes to mind.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Flying in combat.
What are you most excited about?
Retirement, having more time to write, because right now my schedule is really difficult.
What advice would you give your high school self?
To study more in high school. I was a terrible high school student. I barely made it into college to begin with. At one point, I actually dropped out, didn't go to high school for half a year, but I graduated on time. So I would have gotten a little more serious about school a little sooner.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
Well, if I can recommend my own, Cold Zero that I wrote with Brad Thor, it's coming out soon. It really did come out well. Outside that, I'm finishing up Jack Carr's new book, Cry Havoc, and it was very interesting for me because it was about Vietnam. It was his first one set in the Vietnam era, and I learned a lot of things I didn't know before, so it was very well done.
That's awesome. We actually had a couple of people who he talked to for stories and stuff we had on the podcast, and it's just insane to talk about the truth being stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I just feel very fortunate to be in this position. I know that luck has played a part of it, but I think I've worked hard to get here. So I'm just very appreciative, very thankful for what I've been allowed to do and the things I've been allowed to do.
Ward, before we let you go, the last question I ask every guest is, now that you got to know us a little bit and be on the podcast, who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should try to get on as future guests?
Well, I think you have Brad coming on, don't you? Brad Thor?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Okay. Outside him, Jack Stewart would probably be. He's actually a fellow Southwest pilot, but he just wrote a W.E.B. Griffin book, and he's an interesting guy. He's a former Navy F-18 pilot, and he flies for my airline. But I think you would find him very engaging.
Ward, thank you for the years you spent carrying responsibility at altitude and for the pages that carry it forward. You've reminded us that precision without conscience is hollow, that courage often shows up quietly, and that faith doesn't always explain, but it sustains. Thank you for joining us today. May God bless you and your family.
Thank you, Tim. Troy, it was great being with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for it, and thanks for your service.